Good morning. How you doing?
So, what do you take of these Cash Patel and Dan Bongino out hitting the pavement, putting the rubber to the road, and doing interviews?
Well,
I think
I
it's a
tell
good
you,
look.
yeah, and I think what I personally love to hear as a member of Congress who's been in a Democratic House, now a Republican House, and now with Trump in the White House and having to withstand 4 years of Joe Biden in the White House, is you finally have an administration that's talking about repercussions for all of these things that all of us watched happen:
Yeah.
Crossfire Hurricane, spying on the Trump campaign, bombers, January 6th, like all of this stuff that we sit back and go, is there ever going to be justice for these people? I sure hope. I mean, it's very heartwarming to hear from Bongino and from Cash that there's going to be prosecutorial evidence that's going to be sent to the DOJ. And obviously, the DOJ makes that decision, but that's headed up by Pam Bondi. And if there's charges that can be filed, they're going to be filed. That's very good for the nation, because one of the biggest things for conservatives, one of the things that have agitated the crap out of me for years, is all of these people like James Comey, all of these deep state actors that were working for the FBI, that were spying on the Trump campaign, that were using the FISA court to get warrants illegally to spy on the Trump campaign. Nothing has happened to any of these people. Nothing has happened to Peter Strzok. Nothing has happened to any of these people that used the intelligence apparatus of our country to spy on their political enemy. And if nothing ever happens to these people, it'll continue to happen. Now, we've done some reforms in Congress, like putting sworn requirements on some of these FISA warrants that will help. But you got to see some type of justice served on these people that have abused the intelligence apparatus, because that also sends a very strong signal to all these deep state actors. Hey, you Comey, you guys do this stuff, you're going to go to jail and you're going to face penalties for it.
So, Cash Patel, you're on the Intel Committee, so you have oversight of the FBI. It's an intelligence agency. The Cash Patel is saying that information and documents are flowing to Congress right now. They're flowing to you. Can you confirm that that's true?
Yeah, and yes, and I will give you an example of that, because we made it public and declassified some of it. So all the baseball shooting stuff that happened at the practice where Steve Scalise got shot, there was a shooter that shot attempted to try to kill a whole bunch of Republican members of Congress, that the deep state hid and classified it so that the American public couldn't find out that this guy was a far left activist that wanted to kill a bunch of Republican members of Congress that day. All of that was released to us days after we asked him. We had an intelligence briefing hearing. It was open to the public, and we asked him, hey, are you going to give this information to us? For 6 years, we haven't gotten anything, and he released all of it. And then the Intelligence Committee, 2 or 3 weeks ago, we declassified what was declassified and released all that information to the public. This guy, the shooter, was researching members of Congress, Republican members of Congress. He researched the objective. He went out to the baseball field before he committed the crime that he committed. And thankfully that day, Steve Scalise was there, because if he wouldn't have been, his personal detail wouldn't have been there, and there would have been a bunch of dead members of Congress. But we released all of that information. So yes, Cash Patel is flowing that information to Congress, and as he's getting it, he's ordering it to be released, and we're getting stuff that we haven't seen for years. This particular example was 6 years ago, where you had a deep state that was playing defense and not allowing us to get the information that we had requested.
I mean, it confounds the mind that they would cover up for an assassin.
Well,
that
and
was
what's
trying
nuts,
to kill.
it's
They're
none of
trying to
this-
kill Republicans. I mean,
Yes.
it goes past incompetence to malevolence.
Well, and they did that intentionally. None of this should have ever been classified. This guy was a domestic terrorist that should have been classified as this. They classified it as a death by cop type thing. There was no cops on the field that day. This guy didn't know that the people in plain clothes sitting in the dugout were Capitol Police, and he didn't go try to shoot them. He tried to shoot members of Congress. They had notes, that he had a journal. He had specific notes as to what congressman he wanted to kill. This wasn't death by cop. This was a domestic terrorist situation. It was a crime that was committed. It never should have been classified. Once the investigation that was done, all of this information should have been released, but it wasn't, because they wanted to classify it so that they could hide the information from the American public that this guy was a far left Democrat that wanted to kill a bunch of Republican members of Congress that day.
We went through his Facebook back when it was still up, right after the shooting, like seconds afterwards, and it was just MSNBC links. And if this had been a shooter for Democrats in Congress, I hate playing this game, but like if it was just Fox News, I mean, they'd shut down the network, frankly.
Oh yeah.
If it were the opposite, they'd take all of our channels down, right? If they were able to find the opposite effect. And so it's great that it's happening. Be nice for it to happen with some of the more recent. I mean, it's hard to really categorize this as not as less important because people were getting shot on baseball fields, but like we have the January 6th pipe bomber who was clearly identified by the FBI. We've had the agents on the show saying we knew pretty much who this person was, and they told us to stop investigating. What is that, Congressman?
That's
what's going on?
Obstruction of justice and is a federal crime, and that's why to hear the way that Kash Patel and Bongino are talking, if that in fact happened, they got to know who those people are. Those people should be charged with a federal crime, and when that happens, that sends shockwaves into the intelligence agencies. That sends shockwaves into the FBI. That if you obstruct justice for political purposes, you are going to be held accountable. And that's the type of things that I'm talking about that is so refreshing as a member of Congress to see that our agencies are going to be operating in the way that the American people want them to operate, because they haven't been for decades. And finally, hopefully, some of these people will face the justice that they deserve.
What's your take here, Congressman, on the pipe bomber? And again, you're on the Intel Committee. Have you gotten any documentation? And have you gotten any further documentation on January 6th? Federal FBI informants, feds inside of the Capitol wearing MAGA hats, as we've heard members of Congress talking about. Can you preview for us a little bit of the extra knowledge that you're getting now about what happened that day?
Well, finally, after years, we now know that there were undercover FBI. Well, we all knew it, but nobody would admit that that was the fact. But we know there were undercover FBI agents that day at the Capitol. So we in the Intelligence Committee have not gotten specific briefings on that. But those are some things that I can request. And then as this investigation is ongoing, that Kash and Bongino are talking about, obviously they're going to brief the committee on that. So I look forward to reviewing that. But we now know that there were FBI agents, undercover FBI agents in January 6th. Now, what we haven't gotten the information on is what specifically they were doing. Were they just kind of playing along and acting like protesters, or were they actually instigating a lot of this? Because as we do know now, and we still don't have cell phone information from Nancy Pelosi to the Capitol Police. Capitol Police guy resigned. The Sergeant of Arms guy that were under Pelosi that day resigned. Trump on that day offered the military to the National Guard to come and do defense. Nancy Pelosi said no. So I've always believed that this was a huge cover-up and they wanted all of this to happen. I have personally seen video of Capitol Police standing there and people just walking into the Capitol, and those people not knowing that they can't walk in because the cops aren't doing anything. So there's a lot of investigation now that's going to come out of that. Barry Loudermilk and the House Administration Committee has reopened a January 6th investigation to look at all of this stuff. So I'm very much looking forward to that as well. But They can do it a lot faster on the admin side than we can on the congressional side.
So you're saying that you have none of Pelosi's documents from that?
No,
day.
she's never. No, we as Republicans. So back to that period of time, we were in the minority. We requested all of that information. We requested communications between Speaker Pelosi, Capitol Police, Speaker Pelosi, and the Sergeant of Arms, email. We didn't ever get any of that. And then think back to the January 6th committee. That was all, they destroyed evidence. And that's what Barry Loudermilk's committee is now looking at, is the former January 6th committee destroyed evidence before the Republicans took over the majority. Evidence that was exculpatory to the president, and and the chairman never allowed them to go after any of the communications between Speaker Pelosi and Capitol Police and Speaker Pelosi and the sergeant's office. We've never gotten any of that. So I would imagine that's probably been destroyed, but hopefully now that they're doing this investigation the right way, Loudermilk's committee can get some of that information.
Goodness. What's your hunch here, Congressman, as to what they're trying to cover up? Because clearly, if they had put the full weight of the FBI's intelligence and investigation units on, they would know who the pipe bomber was. Again, we have credible sources that are telling us that the FBI pulled their teams from investigating the pipe bomb. And they've been so shady with everything from the gallows that were built and like the hoax there, Ed Martin revealing that hoax live on the program a couple of months ago, to Pelosi's records. Like, it's clearly a cover-up, right? Like, so what's your hunch as to what they're covering up?
Well, my hunch is, because Pelosi was speaker at the time, is they wanted this to happen. They wanted the protesters to be able to come into the Capitol, so then they could label it an insurrection, and then they could hang it on Trump for the rest of his political career. And if you look at what happened in the mainstream media, that's exactly what happened for years. Donald Trump allowed and started an insurrection. You had Liz Cheney chiming in and piling on as a quote unquote Republican. And so that's my hunch, is that Pelosi wanted to create an opportunity for what happened to happen, instead of allowing Trump to bring in the National Guard, which he offered for them and the DC mayor at the time to do, to ensure that nobody got hurt and nobody came in. So my hunch is that they allowed the protesters to come in, created an environment for that to happen, because then politically they could say, oh, look, Donald Trump created this insurrection. Is exactly what they did. Have the January 6th committee to lay it all on Trump, even though he obviously didn't have control of what was happening on the Capitol that day, and blame him for what occurred. That's my hunch. And for years, the FBI refused to tell Republicans, again, we were in the minority, refused to tell Republicans that there were FBI agents on the ground that day. What they would say is, when Director Wray would come in, they'd say, well, we can't confirm or deny that there were any agents that were there that day. Well, now we know that there were agents there that day. What were they doing? Were they instigating? Were they just playing along to be plainclothes officers in case something happened? Or were they involved in what was happening that day? Those are the answers that we still need.
Should we expect a investigation into Nancy Pelosi from a Republican committee and into these actions?
I would encourage you to reach out to Barry Loudermilk and his committee, but I sure hope that that's what they're going to do, because the chairman from Mississippi that chaired the January 6th committee, we know for a fact that they destroyed evidence before the Republicans took over. So one, getting that evidence would be great, and getting the evidence that they destroyed, and two, going after evidence that they absolutely refused to go after. They absolutely refused to go after Nancy Pelosi. He specifically wouldn't allow any communications to become from there. Why? She was the Speaker of the House at the time. She was in charge of Capitol Police. She was in charge of the Sergeant of Arms. And both of those guys resigned right afterwards. I would pull them in and subpoena them and depose them. I would go after as much of the communication as you possibly could to see what exactly was being said between the Speaker at the time and these different law enforcement agencies on that day, and then leading up to that day.
You know, the more that we learn about Joe Biden, his terminal illness, the more that we learn about how completely cognitively collapsed he was, the more valuable that presidency seems to look for someone like Pelosi or an Elizabeth Warren or members of an archetype that wishes to run the executive branch by fiat through autopen. I know you've posted quite a bit about this, and you've been very much a bulldog on this issue. Can you give us an update on where that investigation is going, Congressman?
Yeah, Congressman Comer and the Oversight Committee has started an investigation there. It's my understanding that they know or have a pretty good idea of who the staffers were that were in charge of the auto pen. Obviously, if Joe Biden didn't direct them to do whatever they were doing, that's a violation of federal law. So I'm assuming that they're going to start bringing these people in and deposing them. You don't want to have a public hearing because only members of Congress get 5 minutes, and it's the cameras and all that. You want to subpoena them, bring them in under oath, and have our lawyers depose them for as long as it takes. It could take a day, it could take 2 days, and ask very tough, very pointed questions. I would even hire in outside counsel that do this every single day, do the criminal side of it, because they know what they're doing and they know what questions to ask, and to ask those very important questions of these individuals and get to the bottom of what was happening. But we all know that Joe Biden wasn't in charge of the White House. And again, you know, it takes a couple of years. It takes the Republicans to get in the majority to get the information. But finally, we're seeing what was happening during Joe Biden's presidency.
I'd like to focus in on these pardons. You're no friend of Dr. Fauci. And just focus in really quickly on these pardons. It's a constant scandal that happens where members of Congress, where executives, typically governors, right, get traded pardons for cash, where there's a some type of a business arrangement that happens, and it's totally corrupt. And oftentimes you get stories like this. And do you believe that that's what was happening here with Joe Biden?
Well, and what I think needs to happen, again, this is something that Congress has the ability to do. Bring in Fauci, bring in Liz Cheney, and because they have accepted a pardon, they cannot plead the Fifth Amendment. So when you ask them questions, they have to tell you the truth. They can't hide behind the Fifth Amendment. And if they lie during the commission of a sworn testimony, that is a new crime that is not covered by their pardon. So bring each and every one of these people in. I have encouraged Chair Jordan to do this. I have encouraged Chair Loudermilk to do this because he can do this under the January 6th committee on Liz Cheney. I have encouraged Chair Comer to do this. Bring them in on a subpoena, do a sworn deposition. They cannot hide behind the Fifth Amendment because they accepted the pardon, and they have to tell you everything. And if they lie to you in the commission of the deposition, they have committed a new crime that is not covered by the pardon, and they can be charged for that. So they're stuck. They have to tell you the truth or commit another crime that is not covered by the pardon. I would pull every single one of these people in and start asking very tough, pointed questions. And I think Loudermilk's gotten some of the background information that happened with the January 6th stuff because he's in charge of that investigation. Maybe he's waiting to get that evidence and that information to be able to do a good depo. That's what I would do as a lawyer. And so I hope, and I've encouraged them to do this. That's up to the chairman to do that. But we absolutely have to do that. And they can't hide behind the Fifth, which is a very important piece of the pardon process that would allow us to get a lot of other information, which will also probably get information on a lot of other people that were involved in all this stuff.
Excellent. So just finally, a question about criminal referrals here. Breaking news about the FBI and its secret FISA court cover-up here. Turns out that the FBI has produced documents about Nell Orr lying to the Senate. Chuck Grassley, Ron Johnson will be joining our program in just a moment, but they've been raging about this, that there was a massive cover-up with Russiagate and that there were demonstrable, as they call it, lies in order to launder foreign disinformation through our FISA courts and open up a hoax into Donald Trump. Now, this
100%.
This would be squarely in your wheelhouse with the Intel Committee, because these FISA courts obviously run through your committee and you have oversight of them. Can we expect criminal referrals, the ones that you were talking about earlier in the show, for the Russiagate hoaxers, finally, Congressman?
That is my hope. Kash Patel would be in charge of that investigation. And so based on the comments that he said in the original part of the show, it sounds like they're investigating this. Here is the challenge back then from a criminal referral perspective is, believe it or not, these guys could proffer this information to the FISA court without any swearing of the truth of the authenticity of those subpoenas and those warrants. We've changed that now. Now that's a crime, but back then it wasn't. So you have to get them lying to Congress, which is a crime. So if they've come before Congress, if they've come before the intelligence committees, I wasn't on the intelligence committees at that time, and they lied to Congress, that is absolutely something that they can be charged with and should be charged with. And hopefully the FBI would refer that to the DOJ for prosecution. That has to happen. There has to be some repercussions. All this Russiagate stuff, spying on Trump's campaign, the lies to the American people that were then regurgitated on national news. I mean, all these 51 intel officers who swore and signed a letter that the laptop story was Russian disinformation. Now they've all lost their security clearances thanks to President Trump. But all those people should be held accountable to lying to the American people. It obviously takes a little bit of time, but hopefully all this is coming. All
right. I don't know if are you a Florida Gator, Congressman?
Yeah, I am, and I've been lighting into all this stuff that's going on. I have no idea. Look, I'd encourage your viewers to follow my social media.
Yeah.
Follow my social media. I've pointed out videos, statements this guy has made. Why in the world the University of Florida Board of Trustees, and now it goes to the Board of Governors next week, would think it is a good idea to make this guy president of the University of Florida. I did undergrad law school there. I'm a UF Hall of Famer. I'm a Florida Blue Key member. I spent 8 years of my life at the University of Florida. Obviously, it's important to me that we have a good leader and a good president. And this guy is like the grandfather of DEI in colleges. Why in the world they would think this is a good idea to have him president of the UF, I have no idea.
Well, I think I think that it makes a lot of sense from an enemy's perspective. You have to get a line in at some point into the state of Florida. You've got to be able to break the great things, the great work that the Republican Party is doing in the state. It's the best in the country. And so this would be perhaps a way to do it, right? You sneak in through higher education. It's how Marxists have always done it, Congressman.
Well, and it's crazy. If you watched his interview before the Board of Trustees Tuesday, he backtracked on all of these statements that he's made over the years. Oh, my position has changed now. Oh, so either you were lying then or you're lying now. Regardless, this isn't the type of person with that type of record that we should have leading the institution. And it's shocking to me that, I'm talking about it. Don Jr. just tweeted about it. Charlie Kirk has been talking about it. You've got a lot of conservatives that are raising a really big red flag. And hopefully the Board of Governors next week will see through this guy's masquerade and deny his ability to lead one of the largest universities in the state of Florida.
I'm not one for big-time live announcements of political endorsements, but I endorse Congressman Greg Steube to lead the state of Florida Gators University.
Certainly would have conservative leadership. Holy crap.
It's got to happen. This is the prophecy must be foretold. Thank you very much, Congressman. Godspeed, and everybody, of course, go follow the Congressman who is rounding the corner on 200,000 subscribers on his X feed. An absolute brawler and a freedom fighter in this great free state. Thank you.
Thanks, Benny. Good to see you.